my wife and I were having a conversation years and years and years ago, and we thought, hey, let's do something that's cool together. And as it turned out, when we met, amongst other conversations, it turned out we had kind of like similar backgrounds in a sense. So we thought it would be quite cool to do some sort of joint kind of learning adventure, and to cut a long story short, we ended up signing up for a 14-week Dale Carnegie course on how to win friends and influence people. And such a big title, and it seemed, I thought, a bit cynical at the time. I thought, yeah. And but I tell you what, we went along for 14 weeks, and again, one of those points in your life and points in your career and points in your life where you go, you know what, that actually made a difference.
Hi, welcome to Project Management Matters. This is a podcast that's all about project management, from project, program, portfolio, and PMOs, and everything in between. Today, I'm excited to welcome my friend, Iain Fraser. Iain and I go way back. We served on the PMI board of directors together. We've been colleagues and friends for well over 25 years. Iain, wow, it's been a great journey. And thank you for all your service and leadership in the field of project management. It's great to have you be part of the show, so welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely words, and thank you so much for the invitation. And you're right, 25 years, and I'd love to be able to say that none of us has changed a bit, but I'd probably be telling a bit of a lie if I was to say that. But nevertheless, let us believe such, for a moment, perhaps. Yeah. But hey, look, lovely to be with you, Philip, and looking forward to having a good conversation, a good catch up with you. Yeah.
Fantastic. One of the things that's always amazed me about you, particularly, both personally and professionally, is that you embody the title global citizen. You've been an individual who grew up in one continent, moved to another continent. You've started businesses that were global in nature. You've served on the board of directors at a global level of PMI. So I'd like you to reflect a little bit on that. And maybe we can start with, why do you keep going on with project management? What drives you? What keeps you passionate about it?
Gosh, there's a couple of questions there, and it's a brilliant place to start because, you've touched on a number of things there. Being experiencing and enjoying the opportunity to move around the world, to engage with different businesses, to different people, meet great people like yourself who become friends, and many others. I think it reflects and says, well, this is something special. And to me, that I translate that into, that the profession of project-based management, as I tend to refer, P3M as I more often refer to it, has really shaped my career, Philip, to be perfectly honest. And I don't say that lightly because it truly has. And not to say that I was one of those accidental project managers. Perhaps I am, and possibly I've been called all sorts of other things, but that's another conversation perhaps. But I truly think that the profession has offered immense opportunity for me, both professionally, but even privately and socially, if you like. So I'd start with that as one part of the response. Having grown up in a mega project environment, or not grown up, but the early part of my career, experiencing mega project environment, the oil and gas sector, oil sector in particular, and then moving to the high voltage electricity sector, and then into various other sectors, was really, when I reflect, just a marvelous example of a pathway that I was able to capitalize on opportunities, if I could say that, Philip. Mm-hmm. And those opportunities just came up because I had this passion in my heart, and to some degree in my head, of course, that said, hey, this is something really, really good, and it's worth pursuing. And as I did that with a kind of conscious mind, subconsciously things started happening around me, which, I didn't grab all of them, but I kind of picked what I kind of like felt was good, So here we are,
Absolutely.
Why do I keep involved, to your last question? I think because it's the stimulus, it's the camaraderie, it's the professionalism, it's excitement, and we'll probably get on to talk about this, I suspect. It's about what the future holds, Philip. And I think that is so exciting because we're not done yet. You and I are not done, but I don't think the profession is done by a long stretch. I think there's lots of exciting things that can be looked at and harnessed, perhaps possibly yet.
Indeed, and I think that the growth is just incredible. We
Yeah.
were there in the beginning of PMI going global, if you will, and you're one of the pioneers who was actually braving the, I don't know how many hour flight, to wherever we were meeting from, Birmingham, Alabama to Tennessee to New York and all over the US, coming to these leadership meetings from New Zealand. And that was just incredible to see you show up every time to engage. I want you to kind of think back over the years and reflect specifically, perhaps from the time that you were PMI chair up until today. What do you see as some of the biggest shift that's happened in the profession that maybe kind of took you off guard?
Um, Brilliant question, actually. And there are a couple of things, Philip, and forgive me if I rewind the tape because it's not all about living in the past, as you well know. But sometimes we need to go back a little bit to set context so we can go forward and look into the future a bit. So I think from my own personal journey, I got heavily involved in PMI in the mid to late 90s, actually, would you believe, that initially was becoming a member of PMI, becoming and being a leader and a driving force within the national chapter of New Zealand, which was the very first national chapter on the planet, actually. And some of the initiatives that the team we all did at that point, and that got us going, and then getting engaged globally, Philip, with many people, which and I think you were involved with the global infrastructure and future governance, long-winded title, gathering in Fort Worth in Texas, I think, in '97, which pretty much reset the governance model for PMI, which is pretty much unchanged in terms of root foundational stuff to this very day. And so that getting involved in that was brilliant. But getting further involved, and then finding out that PMI wasn't in a particularly healthy place at that point in time in terms of it was getting lots of demand that PMI couldn't necessarily or appropriately respond to in an appropriate way, kind of demonstrated there was a bit of what I refer to as the speed wobbles. And that drained some of the finances, and then joining the board, to your point, and then going through some dialogue over those first 2 years, and being heavily involved in that decision that would take PMI global was immensely satisfying from a reflection basis, and took it out of this, Philadelphia Philadelphia-based entity that was primarily revolving around North America with what was then called Region 1, which was the rest of the world, and going boom, all of a sudden, it was fantastic, and credit has to be given to not just, you were a member of the special interest group movement at that particular time. And I remember, some of the conversations we had, it's sometimes late into the night, bouncing ideas, you, me, and a group of other people bouncing ideas off each other, and just the energy that we had and the passion that we had for change to build this organization and therefore meet some of the potential that it had. Was enormous, actually. It was truly enormous. And then I remember when the first chair of the board of directors, that was a non-North American, European, I'm sure I can say his name, Louis Merton, fabulous guy, hugely experienced corporate executive, came in at a time, I think, when the organization just needed that wise counsel and on the board, and then recruiting at that time, you know, a new CEO to who had some global perspective, who could take the board's vision forward, was immensely exciting, you know. But as you know, Philip, it didn't stop there, went on and on and on, and here we are today when we reflect not just on PMI, but the profession, because PMI and the profession kind of, it's a hand in glove relationship, of course, as we well know. Yeah.
Thinking back and looking at project management today, is there anything that caught you off guard in terms of how project management evolved? Or do you think that we kind of got it most right in terms of our strategic planning and scenario planning at the time?
Scenario planning, gosh, I remember those times. I mean, that was fantastic. And you know, that those exercises that we did was brain numbing, and I mean that in a very positive way, because it really challenged us all to think differently, to get us out of the comfort zone. And again, on reflection, I think the end result that we came up with was outstanding, actually. You know, astounding, even if you want to use that word too. And it drove the organization forward for a period of time. And even now, I think what's being done now is kind of like, you know, building on top of that, again, core foundation, which is a great thing. In terms of things that were a bit scary, God, there were plenty, mate. I don't know how much time we have, but we can talk for the next 3 or 4 hours on that, both from an organizational point of view, a professional point of view, but and certainly from an individual point of view in my case, you know. And I think that you know, it's all about, and I can't think of specific examples, but I think a realization that there was a global movement that was above and beyond and much, much bigger than I personally had comprehended, even though, you know, to your point earlier, I was in that kind of first bus or first cab off the rank that was in that global, let's go global kind of charge. I was part of that team. I think some of the things we found out were kind of, oh my gosh, you know, and maybe we hadn't quite thought through in our enthusiasm, if you like, to press the green button and go forward. And I think with that said, I think credit has to be given to the employed staff of PMI at that particular time, who actually, you know, embraced what the board were encouraging them to do. In some cases, were instructing them to do, and really ran with it, actually, and delivered. You know, I mean, it wasn't smooth sailing, of course. There was ups and downs, like any normal situation. But, you know, in essence, again, when one reflects, the result, I think, just paved and consolidated the foundation to give us an organization and a profession that we look at today, both you and I, and in different parts of the world, and you know, tens, hundreds of thousands of others in pretty much every part of the world to this very day. I mean, it's fantastic as a story, you know.
Yeah. And as we look, you know, one of the things that some people are not aware of is that the PMI activities that many of us are involved in is actually a volunteer activity. So we've got to have jobs or projects to pay the bills. And with you particularly, you were leading a consulting company, but on a global scale. So you had projects and training sessions literally across continents. One of the things that I wonder if you can reflect on, and you're still very active today, is the application of project management across geographies, especially in your you know, home country, Scotland. I remember when we were there, when we were on the board and we had our summit over there. That must have been one of these surreal moments for you to go back home and be on the PMI board. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey from the perspective of the application of project management and how it might have differed across geographies and continents.
And if I may extend that a tad as well, Philip, I think how my impression shifted from what I thought was project management from my early experiences of my career, having gone through a management development program with Kellogg Brown and Root, or Kellogg ground root, massive, infrastructure organization at the time, and they put me in this development program, which meant that my view of the world was kind of revolved around project controls in my very early part of the career, which then became, a step into what we now call PMOs and things related to that. And I remember developing a particular passion for time, cost, and risk integration, and taking that into a commercial sense, which allowed me to be quite strong, for want of a better word, in terms of negotiations and contract establishment and buyer versus seller, and I had the good fortune to be on both sides, both in a buyer's perspective but also in a seller's perspective, so I could just through those experiences. So my kind of view of the world, as exciting as it was confined to those things. And then suddenly, in the short space of within a decade, I found that, oh my gosh, and all of a sudden, project management profession included things like program management, which I was aware of, portfolio management, which was I'm not aware of at that particular point in time, PMOs, and everything associated with all of those things in pretty much every country in the world. And then all of a sudden you realized, oh my gosh, there are different laws in different countries that allow this and don't allow that, as it were, et cetera, excuse me. Different ways of conducting business. All of those things to me were like eye-openers. And I felt that being in I'm being very fortunate to be in a senior leadership position, particularly with the PMI board of directors, was something that, gosh, I've got to kind of learn some stuff here and just broaden my perspective so that, and very quickly, so that I can, engage fuller, deeper, and with more impact, shall we say. And so I set about doing that, I think most of it was to good effect. Maybe there's some questions around timing in hindsight. Did it happen fast enough? In most cases, yes. Some cases, perhaps not. But look, again, you look at where we are today, and I think all of those experiences kind of shape you as an individual, shape you as a leader. And I think more importantly, Philip, it paves the way and allows you then to give back with sincerity. You might twitch a bit, and look, I'm laughing because and I kind of dodged your earlier question about mistakes. God, I've made heaps, but I've had way more successes than I've had mistakes. So I'll take that as a blessing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about entrepreneurship, because one of the things that I always joke about is that in my own career journey, I became an accidental entrepreneur. If you had asked me when we first joined the PMI volunteer ranks, I was very happy being on the corporate side and very comfortable. And then I became an accidental entrepreneur, and I discovered that there's a whole host of things that I hadn't even the slightest clue on, that I had to learn to be able to survive in that world. I'd love to hear about your experience in entrepreneurship and building Project Plus, and how that perhaps interacted with your PMO and project management background, and whether that was really helpful or a different set of skills that you had to develop.
It was both in a short response, and I think when I look back again, I mentioned oil and gas and mega projects in the UK, and look, I love that. I learned so much from the experience. That management development program I was put on. Again, I will to my deathbed, I will attribute and acknowledge how good that was for me as an individual in terms of giving me direction. I mean, I was like young in my early 20s, and I was kind of all over the place, Philip, to be honest, in retrospect, but that just grounded me and give me direction, give me hope in a sense. Mm-hmm. I moved, to your point earlier, I moved to New Zealand for a holiday. I then moved a second time for a working holiday. and I worked at New Zealand Steel and was part of a team. I was a team leader actually for a bunch of people who were commissioning and bringing up to production level a brand new hot cold strip mill, which took raw iron ingots and plates and turned them into sheet steel and finished products associated with that. Massive, and that's what I studied in university, manufacturing and production control. And I tell you what, Philip, feeling like being totally out of my depth, even though I studied and I knew the language, I knew the lingo, but I had never actually applied it for real, other than a short, project assignment as part of my, learning program, And I was so thankful for the team because they carried it through, and I was just acting as the team leader. But anyway, I came back for a third time, and that's where I got involved in a high energy HVDC project. It was a mega project, in today's terms, it'd be $1.5 billion, maybe 2 billion or something. And out of that, I got invited by the buyer company, the host company, to help them set up what would become a PMO, which we did. So I engaged a team, and in parallel with that, I'd set up this company called Project Plus, and managed to get some good people involved, really good people involved, and before we knew it, we had lots of contracts in the telecoms sector and the high voltage energy sector, and even in the banking sector. And then we ended up across multiple sectors, including central and local government, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we had an office in London, we had an associate office in Dubai, an associate office in Malaysia, and to some degrees an associate office in the USA. And all of a sudden we went from, oh my gosh, this is almost like a contracting environment, to suddenly, as you said, entrepreneurship of, okay, what's next? And this is where the link back comes, which I find really, really interesting, because some of those experiences we touched on earlier, the scenario planning, actually helped me in my private business life by understanding what those tools were and could be utilized and harnessed, the power of them, and bringing that into a local level and taking the team through those and coming up with, a bit of a robust strategy that allowed the company to meet and across multiple service offerings, meet various demands from various sectors at different points in time in different geographies. It was amazing, really. And then maybe to conclude that story, in 2014, I got a phone call from a gentleman, and he said we've been doing some global search, and we're looking to do some acquisition. Your company and your name keeps popping up. Would you be interested in having a cup of coffee? And Philip, the answer to that question is always yes. Always yes. So we did, and to cut a long story short, they did an acquisition. And as prior to that, I always had a belief that we had something really special, and I wanted to make sure that as part of a strategy that we had it sales ready, which is a kind of term that we use, make it sales ready. So we had protected lots of our IP, we'd protected various other things. We promoted the brand, we made the brand, made sure the brand was strong, and really not with the intention of putting the for sale sign on the front door, but more in case of, it was more that scenario. And we had a kind of like a 5-year window. Well, maybe in 5 years, we should be thinking about this. And look, the 5 years didn't eventuate. It happened in 2014. There was a bit of transition, and in March 2015, the deal was all done. And it was a fantastic thing, and so I think that's 10 years ago. And, since then I've been dabbling in, I've written a couple of business books. I've got a third one in the plan, and I kind of leverage a little bit from them, and I stay as active as I can, Philip, So in terms of entrepreneurs, I think there's always something to consider. And maybe if I could offer this, the one thing to me that is not necessarily grabbing what seems to be the hot potato of the moment or the flavor of the moment, perhaps maybe is a better expression. For what it's worth, rightly or wrongly, could hang back and I would kind of read a lot of stuff first and I would think about it and I would ask myself, is that right for you, Iain? Is this right for you? And, which comes back to maybe like core values or needs or, whatever it might be, something a bit deeper, something a bit more psychological. And I would trust my gut on this. And then I would say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to jump on this bandwagon because I could lose my shirt. And more importantly, at one point, we had a whole bunch of people working for us, I remember having 125 people in one client only, and it used to terrify me. I couldn't sleep at night because I thought, well, if that stopped, it was like this massive dollar bill that we'd have furnish and meet at the end of the month. I go, oh my gosh, So to me, I used to trust my gut a bit on and take advice from the other leaders in the organization about, is this something we should be pursuing, or is this something we can maybe park to one side and maybe take a slightly different perspective, because it'll give us a bit of longevity, or our clients will like us better for that, whatever, just circumstantial too a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
I think that's great. I was wondering, as you're specifically talking about making that transition from the corporate side into the consulting side, did you find that at least in those early days, that it was almost like kind of advocating for project management just to be able to go and sell these consulting engagements? Or was there a lot of reception and understanding, perhaps in the sectors that you were targeting, as compared to maybe other areas in the globe or different industries?
Good question. And I think some of those industries or sectors, I think were maybe more advanced in their thinking, and therefore then more advanced in their needs, or their need for assistance. So that was good. Being able to understand that, I think, was very helpful and useful. I think very fortunate in New Zealand at the time, the PMI chapter, which I was a founding member of, and I think I was their third president, and I was the guy who triggered the very first national conference in project management specific. Excuse me. And I think that formed as a bit of a catalyst for the business scene to kind of go, hey, this is something that's good. This is something that we need to be thinking of. And it was the for-profit as well as the non-profit sectors. And all of a sudden, there was this kind of wave of energy, which therefore, Philip, without sounding at all or intending to be arrogant or whatever, but because that's not me, but it was just being in the right place at the right time, and therefore then I was able to comment and message and offer opinion, really. At that stage, far from any sort of thought leadership title, opinion would be probably more accurate. But that opinion was sourced from, being involved globally, reading a great deal, having a desire in my head, and maybe a little bit to your point earlier, Philip, about that entrepreneurship, connecting those dots and going, yes, that's where I want to be going, and I kind of thought that was okay. So, there was a period there where just everything worked beautifully. And the company blossomed. I would like to think the clients enjoyed success in their respective businesses and organizations as a consequence of that. PMI, the chapter in New Zealand, definitely benefited as a consequence in terms of very quick growth and very quick national awareness. Remember the very first national chapter with branches, that very first model. And that just captured people's imagination. So again, like I said, right place, right time, Philip. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things that I can't help but continue to think about, especially when we reflect on the journey of leadership, is the people side of things. And project management is really all about leadership, all about people. One of the things that I've always been impressed about, watching you interact with people, is just how natural it is to engage and connect with them on a personal level. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that plays a role in project success in terms of the people side of project management and leadership.
Look, brilliant. Thank you for bringing that up. And, I have to, I almost feel a bit of emotion coming in, because I tell you how it started, Phil, was that my wife and I were having a conversation years and years and years ago, and we thought, hey, let's do something that's cool together. And as it turned out, when we met, amongst other conversations, it turned out we had kind of like similar backgrounds in a sense. So we thought it would be quite cool to do some sort of joint kind of learning adventure, and to cut a long story short, we ended up signing up for a 14-week Dale Carnegie course on how to win friends and influence people. And such a big title, and it seemed, I thought, a bit cynical at the time. I thought, yeah. And but I tell you what, we went along for 14 weeks, and again, one of those points in your life, and points in your career, and points in your life where you go, you know what, that actually made a difference. Now, prior to that, here's a boy, grew up in the Highlands. I wasn't the best academic in the school. I was pretty much the best sportsman, though, however. But I was certainly more of a victim rather than more of the victor rather than a victim. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to play more of the victor side, and I demonstrated that through my sporting proneness, if you like, and that gave me confidence. And then doing this, How to Win Friends and Influence People 14-week program, together with a whole bunch of other stuff since then, but really helped me move on from being a kind of shy, a little bit lacking self-confidence at times, believe it or not, into feeling a lot more confident inside me, where I could therefore then engage with people that I needed to engage with. And to this very day, that program still stands, and I still can point towards it and go, gosh, that actually helped me, say hello to person X, Y, and Z and engage in a bit of a conversation. Bloody difficult, actually, at times. And funny enough, because I'm kind of like semi-retired now, I'm not practicing that maybe as much as I used to, you find that the edge comes off it a little bit. So I'm almost at times feel as though, do you know what, I'll just stand in the back of the room, and watch people have a nice glass of red wine or something, and just watch, rather than being, hello, my name's Iain and things. So I'm not saying everybody should follow that model, because I actually believe the future means that all of us should be having more face-to-face interactions and more social contact, human contact with each other. I think that's, to me, it's a massive thing for the future well-being of society as well as professionally.
Yeah. I want to also reflect on another topic related to the intersection of project management and business, which is governance. Because I know that you're pretty passionate about the topic of governance and how you see that kind of intersecting with project management. Is there a particular side of the business world, perhaps, that kind of still misunderstands project management? And what role does governance kind of play in that?
Look, and I think the word governance can mean different things to different people. I think within a P3M community, governance is about typically PMOs and sponsors. And look, I'm not saying that's not right. I actually support that. But in a business world, and for that matter, a non-profit world, professional governance is where we're talking about boards of directors, wise people. So that's kind of point one. I think you touched on something about point two. How do professional directors look upon project management as something weird that they don't fully understand? I think the answer is yes. or they don't, they convince themselves they don't need to understand because they have a CEO and possibly others that are the direct employees of the board, and they kind of expect he or she or them to do what's required. And I think, you know, it was a model I used to support about 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. I think today, though, my views shifted because the world is shifting so much. I think there needs to be what I call proactive governance, where there's more overlap between organizational governance per se versus day-to-day operational governance. And I think this kind of false demarcation line between the CEO's responsibilities, he or she, and the board's things, I think there needs to be more of an overlap there now, because the time of information flow and possibly the need for change don't necessarily align. So if you have a long window of information flow that leads to a right decision being made that's like 5 or 6 weeks too late, then that's 5 or 6 weeks too late that may well impact the actual well-being, financial well-being in some cases, or customer contact well-being of that organization. So I'm a big proponent of some form of overlap and a healthy tension between the two roles. So I don't think that line of demarcation, as I said, exists any longer. I think the other thing that pops into mind too is that, I think there's more that the P3M profession, the project management profession, can be doing to guide, assist, communicate with professional directors to better align the P3M3 definition of governance to that of a more organizational governance, and kind of align both, point to similarities, but also highlight maybe the differences, and explain that it's not one against the other. They're actually complementary in a way. It's just at different levels of I guess, responsibility and accountability. And one of the key things in organizational governance is the massive emphasis on not just responsibility, but accountability, you know, and I think that is not pushed down through organizations as well as it might be. Yeah. At the same time, I think the profession can be pushing up more and having more engaging conversations, not about ways of working or things similar, but more about helping others understand why we have these complementary terms and why we have these complementary services, if you like, which are not designed to be threatening. They're actually designed to be complementary.
I think one of the things that you kind of implicitly touched on is the importance of having a common language. Those of us who've been involved in project management, certainly for a few years, know that when you get into an organization or you launch a new project, a lot of the battle happens around terminology, just making sure that we're using the same words to mean the same things. And even in new organizations, we find that one of the first exercises that happens is agreeing on common definitions. And I think this is a perfect example where perhaps some of the terms that we use in a project management context may not be the same that are used at a governance context or a board leadership context. One of these concepts that I wanted to have you comment on is project success and the definition of project success and how it has evolved. I'm sure you are familiar with some of the dialogue that PMI has had around defining project success. And has it evolved? Has it always meant the same thing for you? And do you think that the definition of project success differs, culturally or on a industry by industry level? I'd love to hear some thoughts about that.
Yeah, look, interesting. And, I think it's important to be open and frank in terms of responding to that. I actually, some of the commentary I don't think is quite right, Philip. I think it needs some more work yet. I think the intention is good in terms of shifting it beyond a perceived criteria, if you prefer. I think if you look around the world today, with the exception of a few places, most of the world is feeling some economic pressure. And so for some organizations, or even for the profession to, not everybody, but some in the profession to claim that, cost and time is not as important as it was. I think is misfounded, quite frankly. Particularly, again, as I say, in today's economic situation that we find ourselves in, I think that's silly. So whether we're raising capital to fund initiatives, or whether we're repaying, or whether we're just trying to manage within a defined budget, or whatever, I think it all. I think, yeah, there's an issue there. I think there's more thinking to be there. I think in terms of prompting what that thinking maybe should be focusing on, I use the word value, Philip, and I've been. Yeah, I think you remember I introduced the notion of benefits realization in 2003. In 2006, Gerald Bradley in the UK published a marvelous book, which was the first, he claimed, the first published work on benefits realization. And I made contact with him, no need to say that, hey, look, I had a 9-page white paper published in a business magazine in New Zealand, so sorry, I'm going to claim that prize. But I remember introducing benefits realization into PMI around that same time, might have been 2004, and I kind of got laughed at, actually. Since then, my thinking has gone way past that, and I think the conversation now and the future, therefore, in terms of project success, is about the value delivered. Now, very easy to say, because the word value conjures up beautiful things in everybody's minds, but that's not all the same beautiful things. So we need to define what value actually means. And you know, in my first book, I offer some sort of you know, commentary around that and some suggestions, not as a solution, but as a kind of piece of thinking to say, well, look, start here and kind of build it out to suit your own organization. I'm still, a few years later, still very adamant that, you know, if we were to hang it off a very articulated, simplified, descriptive or description around what value means, and then build success onto that, success could then be, in my terms, and let me offer this if I may, one of four things, I beg your pardon. It could be out and out, in a simplistic way, out and out financial success. Absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And I don't think that will ever change, again, for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. I think the second thing would be strategic value. And that strategy is normally associated with some sort of organizational change. Excuse me. And of course, as you're well aware, today's environment is making leaders think about change way more often than perhaps they did, you know, 10, 15 years ago and more. I think change is just something that's part of any strategy of today at an organizational level. I think there needs to be, from an external point of view, there needs to be some sort of like customer/community aspect of change, societal change if we're in a non-profit environment. But then there needs to be an internal one, and I refer to that as staff and brand. So, you know, there needs to be some value interpretation to the staff that work in the organization, and therefore then how that affects on the brand. And, you know, a couple of brands, just by way of examples, right off the top of my head, the Virgin brand, you know, Richard Branson and what he stands for, and in particular, his airline businesses, his other transportation trains and cruise ships. You know, his brand is mega powerful, and because he gets that staff and brand bit big time, which means then the customer and community bit is fueled with success, which means the strategy is given, which means that money comes in through the tills, as it were, you know, or bank accounts, whatever analogy one wants to put in there. So I think, Phil, again, in summary, you know, I think the word value, having a deeper and better understanding, a more consistent, definite non-value methodology, because I studied that many years ago and I love it. You know, that's about speeding up and reducing waste. You know, classic production line time in motion, you know, some people used to call it back in the day. That's part of it, but it needs to go beyond that. What is our organization? What's our definition of value? What does it mean to us? And what's our definition? And therefore then how do we plan around that? How do we deliver against it? How do we measure and report and communicate performance against that?
Yeah, you mentioned the benefits realization, and when I look at how that has evolved, and also kind of think in terms of the context of the growth of agile, both as a movement and a method, and how it impacted project management, and the discussions that some of which were very difficult to re-examine things as simple as what's the definition of a project, is project management or the concept of a project relevant, especially in the context of value. And then as I look at how portfolio management evolved, one example that comes to mind is a discussion that I had a few years ago with an individual that said, look, we're getting ready to build a new metro system in our city. And we would like to know, if we built a metro station in neighborhood X, what economic benefit it had on that particular neighborhood in terms of jobs and unemployment and crime and so on and so on and so forth. And that really just kind of took me by surprise at the time, because up until that point, I was just simply thinking in terms of direct benefit, not necessarily kind of the macro level. So as I was kind of thinking about that, and to our earlier discussion before we started the recording related to the impact of AI, I was wondering, perhaps now we're at a point where we can leverage AI to help us structure models for defining value and measuring value long after the project perhaps was concluded, and in a way that when everybody just kind of leaves the project, everybody kind of forgets about that benefit realization. What are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I actually talk on this quite a bit, given the opportunity, Philip, and I think I advocate strongly that benefits realization, a window associated with that, is a path towards the confirmation or validation of value being achieved in whatever one or more of those four themes that I referred to earlier. And I still believe that's the case. I think at some point, you've got then to turn, so that the benefits realization is really the transition that allows the desire of a business case then to demonstrate good, bad, or indifferent. But at some point then, the legacy is I think the word that I would use to summarize what you were touching on. How does that community benefit? What is the legacy in that community for the next 15, 20 years? Now, that's not part of the business case, or it shouldn't be part of the business case, in my opinion, because you can't really define it that well without spending a heap of extra money that's not necessarily going to get funded or could get funded. But so it becomes a kind of like a intangible kind of benefit or value legacy that's derived. So to me, I think projects deliver output, programs deliver outcomes. There's a benefits window, and that benefits window needs to be defined from a timeline point of view, i.e. 6 months, 10 months, 9 months, 7.5 months, whatever. And then at that point there, then whatever is the outcome, be it external or internal, CapEx or even OpEx driven, there needs to be this kind of value thing. And that's where I think portfolio leaders and EPMO leaders, and there's, as you well know, Philip, there's a hand-in-glove relationship, or should be, between those people. They need to kind of scale up a little bit in terms of their knowledge, their capabilities, so that they're touching and influencing more on what you and I would call the business acumen type of aspects, and sharing that then with more executive leaders to help those people, including governing bodies, i.e. board members, including them, to help them be more aware of situational decision-making that's required, and allow them to make a better, more timely decision that is value-driven rather than just dollars and cents that we often see. And again, maybe being a little bit cynical with that last comment here.
I think that's great, because, and this is just an example of the type of dialogue that we could have for hours, because it's really at the center of the evolution of project management and the future. And I want to kind of, as we try and wrap up the discussion, have you think a little bit about the next generation of project management professionals, individuals who are potentially interested in the field of project management, potentially considering a role in project management. What advice might you have for them, especially in terms of the mind shift that they need to have coming into the profession and continuing to help it grow?
Tricky. Good question to finish with, and a tricky one. And it'd be very easy to say, rattle off kind of like some of the headline stuff that one reads in the newspapers or the business publications, etc. I think not, though. I think that could lead us down a bit of a blind alley. And I think there's a couple of things that spring to mind, and I may not necessarily get these in any particular priority order, Philip, so bear with me. I think if we look at challenges, and I'll use myself as an example, I think empathy, the need to slow down, and the ability to listen carefully were three things that I learned that I needed to do some time back. I think my wife would probably say I need to keep doing some of them, possibly, but that again is another conversation. But I learned from those things. So if we take those into your question that you posed, I think the temptation nowadays to rely on AI and all things generated AI must be very real for young professionals that are coming into the project management profession or even a management consultancy profession and looking to carve out, the sort of successful careers, Philip, that we've been blessed with experiencing. I think in order to do that is not have an absolute reliance on technology, using and being able to use technology, but at the same time being able to say yes, no, in terms of where the framework is or where the fence or demarcation line is. I think that's critical because I think, again, none of us really know what the future of AI might be. If the stock market implodes, and there's certainly plenty of people much wiser than me are predicting that this actually could be something, and that, the massive amounts of investment we're seeing in AI may not actually deliver anything, or the technology surpasses the current form now, which means there's going to be massive amounts of lost investment, which is not going to help anybody whatsoever. So I think not relying on technology be one thing. I think building a network, a professional network, a face-to-face network, and expanding that through social media, appropriate social media, I should add. I think it's critical. But, as you do, Phil, and many other friends and colleagues, it's been able to use that network to good effect, I think, is the difference between having a big network versus being able to use it to learn, to engage, to seek advice, etc., and to gain and look for opportunities. Excuse me. That would be my second point, is get away from behind the screen and get out there and force yourself to meet and greet and say hello and understand people and engage with other humans and ask questions of them and listen to what they're saying and being empathetic towards what they're responding to you, and use that then to build out one's own things. I think talking about experiences, I think the third thing would be to build on the experiences. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean job hopping and going from A to B to C to D and just doing the same job again and again and again, either in a contracting model or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think building out experiences allows one to go through a trajectory of deep capability, which gets you to a point where, and this kind of links back to one of the questions you asked earlier, it gets you to a point where you can be seen as a trusted advisor, because people can ask you questions knowing that what you say may not actually be what they want to hear, but they actually feel, because you're a trusted advisor, they'll adopt what you're saying and they'll put it into whatever action they need to. I think you can only achieve that by building on your experiences, and with that, supplementing that with ongoing learning in whatever capacity that might be. And that converges, those two things converge at some point and get you into, the trusted advisor kind of thing, where you use your head, you use your gut. Sorry, that's my heart. Your head, your heart, and your gut. Further down, you can't see me pointing to my gut. You don't need to see my gut, by the way. But, you know, the head, heart, and gut. So you have logic and reasoning up here, and decision making. You have the passion and desire in here that drives you and fuels you each morning. Excuse me. And down in the gut region, you have what I refer to as the judgment. And those three things are working together in some capacity. I think you can only get that if you adopt those first three things. So for young people, again, is look to become, you know, what you and I are now. I think I'm a few years older than you, Philip, but hopefully they don't end up with the same hairstyles that you and I have. But you know, to get to that area where you become or are seen as a trusted advisor, you have to have you know, certain experiences that build, and you have to have this learning mentality that allows you to develop, and challenge, and you have to force yourself out of your comfort zone. And again, go back to, you know, the shy little boy that used to hide in the corner. And look, sometimes I still do that, as I said earlier. You have to force yourself out from doing that, so you engage with people and you know, put a smile on your face and you know, tell a story. You know.
I love that answer. I think that it's so well thought out and full of wisdom. It's almost like a mini masterclass, and I really appreciate that, Ian. It's wonderful talking with you as always, and I so much appreciate your passion and leadership and engagement. You've been an inspiration and continue to be an inspiration for me and many others. So for those of you who've been able to join us, I want to thank you, and until next time, have a great day. Thanks.
Fantastic, Philip. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.